My son and his fiancée called me old and removed me from their wedding while using my money to pay for it. So I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I let the wedding start. Then I shut off $180,000 mid-ceremony and exposed the plan they had to declare me mentally unfit and take everything I own. I stood in a boutique in Greenwich, Connecticut, surrounded by the scent of expensive leather and vanilla candles. In my hand was a $1,200 silk scarf for my daughter-in-law, Vanessa. My son, Julian, was marrying her in 4 days in Napa Valley. I had already wired $250,000 for the venue, the catering, and the orchids. I was the widow of a hedge fund titan, and for years I had been the silent engine behind Julian's lifestyle. I thought I was buying their happiness. In reality, I was funding my own disappearance. My phone chimed with an Instagram notification. It was a close friend's story. Vanessa had forgotten she added me to that list a year ago and never removed me. It was a photo of her and her bridesmaids clinking glasses. The caption was a jagged shard of glass. Finally, the inner circle only. No gray hair, no suffocating old-fashioned lectures. Real family vibes, only for the big day. Sorry, not sorry. Below it, Julian had commented, "Can't wait for a day without my mother's financial oversight hovering over us." Peace, at last. I stood frozen near the perfume display. I wasn't just being uninvited, I was being mocked by the very people using my black card for their rehearsal dinner. For 30 years in compliance, I had taught Julian that every signature has a consequence. He seemed to have forgotten that I was the one who signed the checks. I didn't cry. Instead, a cold, clinical clarity washed over me. I handed the scarf back to the associate, walked to my Lexus, and sat in the silence. It was time to audit my life, and the first item was my son's gratitude. If they wanted a day without my oversight, I was going to give them a lifetime of it. Vanessa thought she was being private. I knew she was being reckless. In my world, recklessness is the first step toward bankruptcy. I started the engine not toward the airport, but toward my lawyer's office. The real family was about to learn how expensive it is to be a stranger. I didn't go home to mourn. I went home to my office. Numbers never lie, but people do. I opened my MacBook and noticed a series of notifications. Because Vanessa had used my iPad during her last stay, our devices were still partially synced via the family sharing feature. I didn't need to hack anything. The evidence was flowing into my cloud storage like a toxic river. She was reckless, thinking I was too old-fashioned to understand cloud backups. I found a recurring charge for a high-security storage unit in Brooklyn under her maiden name. The inventory photos made my blood turn to ice. They were antique French clocks and silver sets from my late husband's estate items that had vanished during their move to Tribeca. She was selling my husband's legacy on private auction sites to fund an influencer lifestyle that her $4,200 savings account couldn't support. She was living on a house of cards built from my stolen memories and a mountain of credit card debt. But the deepest betrayal was a PDF titled The Long Game. It was a series of messages between Julian and a lawyer. They were discussing how to bypass the prenuptial agreement. Julian's words were typed in cold ink. "Don't worry, babe. Once the wedding footage is sold, we'll start. We'll claim she's showing signs of dementia. We'll get the power of attorney and move her to a facility. She's already forgetful enough. The court will believe us." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. My son wasn't just ungrateful. He was a predator, waiting for his mother to grow old enough to be robbed. He thought I was forgetful, but I remembered exactly where I kept the keys to his kingdom. I downloaded every file, every message, and every auction receipt. In compliance, we don't just find the fraud, we document it until there is no escape. Julian wanted a day without my oversight. I was about to give him a lifetime of it. He wanted to play the long game, but I was the one who owned the board. Most women would have called Julian screaming, but the loudest person in the room is the one losing. I spent Friday calling the vendors. I didn't cancel the wedding. I exercised the change of payer clause in the contracts. I informed the chef and the Napa Vineyard that I was withdrawing my financial sponsorship effective at 5 p.m. According to the contract, the secondary card on file Vanessa's Visa would be automatically charged for the remaining $180,000 balance. I knew Vanessa's finances. Her card wouldn't just be declined. It would trigger a cascade of failed transaction alerts across every vendor's tablet in Napa. I also called my real estate attorney. The Tribeca condo was held in a trust, and Julian had signed a non-tenant occupancy agreement, which allowed for immediate revocation in cases of moral turpitude or criminal activity against the trust. The theft of the estate items was my golden ticket. I scheduled a gut renovation to begin Sunday morning. I wasn't evicting them in the traditional sense. I was reclaiming a property used to hide stolen goods. By the time I was finished, I had redirected the private car service to my own address. I spent Friday evening at a quiet jazz bar sipping a martini. I wasn't a victim. I was an auditor closing a fraudulent account. I watched the clock strike 5 p.m. In Napa, the first declined message was likely popping up on the florist's iPad right about now. The orchids were already wilting, and the bride didn't even know the water had been turned off. I booked a private flight for the next morning. I didn't want to miss the climax of the story I had spent 30 years writing. Julian and Vanessa wanted to play the long game. They just didn't realize I was the one who wrote the rules. They wanted to see if they could survive without me. I was happy to let them try, provided they paid the full market price for the experience. Saturday morning in Napa was supposed to be Vanessa's crowning moment. The sun was shining, but the atmosphere inside the bridal suite was turning toxic. I arrived at the Vineyard's private terminal and took a car to the venue, keeping my phone off. When I finally powered it on, the notifications were a digital war zone. 30 missed calls from Julian, 15 from the wedding coordinator. I sat in the back of the car watching the Vineyards roll by, feeling a strange sense of detachment. I answered Julian's next call. His voice was a frantic mess. "Mom, what is happening? The caterer is refusing to unload the lobster. They said the payment didn't go through. Vanessa's card was declined 3 times, and now the florist is pulling the centerpieces off the tables. Fix this. Tell them it's a mistake." I smoothed my navy Chanel suit. "It's no mistake, Julian. I'm just practicing financial independence, just like you wanted. Remember your post. You said you wanted a day without my oversight. This is what that looks like. It looks like paying your own bills." "What?" I heard Vanessa screaming in the background, a sound of pure, unhinged desperation. "Mom, you're being insane. We have guests here. People from the firm," Julian pleaded. I replied calmly. "Then I suggest you find a way to pay them. Or perhaps Vanessa can auction off another one of my husband's silver sets to cover the lobster. Oh wait, I've already contacted the auction site. Those accounts are frozen too." The silence on the other end was absolute. The realization was finally sinking in. The ATM was not only closed, it was demanding a refund. I told the driver to pull up to the main entrance. The real family was waiting, and I had brought the receipts. I walked toward the ceremony site, past the confused guests and the half-empty bar. Vanessa was standing near the altar, her $20,000 dress looking like a shroud. This wasn't a wedding anymore. It was a crime scene, and I was the lead investigator. I didn't wait for the music to start. I walked down the center aisle, the clicking of my heels the only sound. The guests, a mix of Manhattan's elite and Julian's colleagues, watched in confusion. I didn't look like a mother of the groom. I looked like a woman delivering a verdict. I stepped up to the microphone before the officiant could say a word. I could see the panic in Julian's eyes, a desperate plea for me to stop. But I had spent too many years staying silent for his benefit. "Camille, stop this," Julian hissed. I ignored him and addressed the crowd. "I apologize for the lack of flowers and the impending lack of dinner. It seems there's been a significant compliance issue with the funding of this event." I held up my tablet, which was connected to the venue's large display screen. Instead of a love story, I projected the long game messages and the photos of the stolen antiques from the storage unit. My son and his bride felt I was forgetful enough to be robbed and then discarded into a facility. I said, my voice echoing. They wanted a day without my oversight. I decided to give them a lifetime of it. The murmurs from the guests rose. I saw Julian's boss, a man who valued character, lean forward with a look of pure disgust. Vanessa let out a guttural scream and lunged toward me, but the security team I brought stepped in. "Vanessa," I said, looking her in the eyes. "The detectives will be contacting you shortly regarding the stolen estate property. I suggest you keep that dress clean. You might need to sell it for legal fees." I turned to the guests. "The bar is open for 20 minutes on my personal tab. After that, find a lovely bistro in town. This wedding is adjourned." I walked out without looking back, leaving Julian standing at the altar of a life he had just set on fire. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a freedom I hadn't known in decades. The audit was complete. The drive back to the airport was the quietest 30 minutes of my life. My phone continued to vibrate, but the failed transaction alerts were replaced by frantic texts from my sister and cousins. The video of the slideshow of betrayal was already circulating. In the age of the influencer, there are no secrets. Vanessa's perfect day was now the top trending drama in our social circle, a viral cautionary tale of greed and arrogance. Julian tried to call me one last time before I boarded my flight. He wasn't screaming anymore. He was sobbing. "Mom, please. Julian's boss just told him not to come in on Monday. They're saying it's a reputation risk. We have nothing. You can't leave us like this in California." I stood on the tarmac, the wind whipping my hair. "You have each other, Julian. That's what you said in your post, isn't it? Real family vibes. Now you get to see if those vibes can pay for a hotel room. You wanted independence? Now you have the absolute version of it." By the time I landed in New York, the renovation of the Tribeca condo was in full swing. My security team had supervised the packing of their belongings. Because they were not legal tenants under the trust's occupancy agreement, and because the agreement was voided by their moral turpitude, they were officially homeless. I had filed the police report for the stolen art 3 hours before the wedding, and while the detectives weren't at the vineyard, the warrant for the Brooklyn storage unit was already being processed. The long game was over, and they had lost on the very first move. I went to my new apartment, a place they didn't have the address to, and finally slept. The silence was the best gift I had ever received. I was no longer a safety net. I was the ground they had finally hit. I had spent my life building a home for a son who wanted to turn it into a prison for me. Now, I was finally building a home for myself. Sunday evening in Manhattan was cold. Julian and Vanessa arrived at the Tribeca condo having spent their last dollars on a commercial flight. They didn't find a welcoming home. They found a construction zone sign and their lives packed into 32 cardboard boxes on the sidewalk. My security detail sat in a black SUV across the street, ensuring no one entered the building. The golden life they had taken for granted was now literally sitting in the gutter. Julian called me, his voice sounding like it was coming from a well. "Mom, our stuff is on the street. The locks are changed. Vanessa is having a breakdown. You can't legally do this." I sat in my new living room. "Actually, Julian, checked the occupancy license you signed. It's not a lease. It's a conditional privilege. You violated the conduct clause by conspiring to defraud the trust. The police in Brooklyn have already opened the storage unit. They found the French clocks, Julian. They found everything." Vanessa grabbed the phone, her voice shrill. "I'll sue you. I'll tell everyone how you've treated us." I laughed, a genuine, tired laugh. "Vanessa, everyone already knows. The video from the vineyard has 2 million views. You're not an influencer anymore. You're a pariah. And as for suing me with what money your card is maxed, and Julian doesn't have a job." I told them that a courier would be by in an hour with a voluntary relinquishment form. If they signed it, renouncing all claims to the family estate, I would decline to testify in the criminal case. It was a justice deal, not a cruelty deal. I was giving them a chance to avoid prison, but not a chance to stay rich. They were left on the sidewalk surrounded by designer luggage they couldn't afford to keep. I hung up and poured myself a glass of wine. The transition was complete. They were finally exactly where they deserved to be, starting from scratch without my name to protect them. The following month was a masterclass in the real world for my son. Without the Camille signature on his documents, Julian discovered that he was remarkably unremarkable. His firm officially terminated him for conduct unbecoming, citing the reputational risk revealed at the wedding. Vanessa, true to her nature, didn't stay to help him navigate the studio apartment in Queens he had managed to rent. She fled to Ohio the moment the papers were signed, realizing that a husband without a trust fund was a liability. I watched the legal proceedings from a distance. The Brooklyn district attorney was satisfied with the return of the antiques, and as promised, I didn't push for the maximum sentence. I wanted justice, not blood. Julian received 3 years of probation and 400 hours of community service. It wasn't cruelty. It was the first time in his 32 years he had to pay a debt he couldn't charge to my account. He was working as a junior clerk at an insurance firm, living in a space that smelled of old cabbage and broken dreams. I spent my time clearing out the remnants of my old life. I sold the Greenwich estate and moved into a sun-drenched loft in Brooklyn. I started a small consultancy firm that helped the elderly protect their assets from predatory heirs. My first client was a woman whose daughter was trying to sell her house while she was still living in it. I felt a surge of energy I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just a safety net for a spoiled man. I was a shield for people who actually needed one. Julian tried to send me an email on Thanksgiving. He didn't ask for money. He asked if I was okay. I didn't reply. Not because I hated him, but because the silence was part of his education. He needed to learn how to exist without my echo. He needed to find out who he was when there was no one there to catch him. For the first time in my adult life, I was breathing air that wasn't heavy with someone else's expectations. 1 year after the vineyard disaster, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Julian. He didn't sound like the arrogant man from the Instagram post, nor the sobbing boy from the sidewalk. He sounded like a man who had been working 10-hour shifts. "Mom, I don't want anything. I promise. I just wanted to tell you." I found the mahogany desk, the one from Dad's study that Vanessa sold. I felt a sudden, sharp catch in my throat. That desk was where my husband had written every love letter to me for 25 years. It was the emotional anchor of our marriage. "How?" I asked softly. "I've been tracking the auction IDs for months," Julian said. "I found the buyer in Jersey. I've been working a second job at a warehouse to save up. I bought it back today. It's in a storage unit, a real one paid for by me. It's yours whenever you want it. I'll pay for the delivery." I sat in my Brooklyn loft, looking at the empty space by the window. For a year, I had practiced being enough without him. I had found my own voice and my own worth. But I also knew that justice wasn't about eternal punishment. It was about the possibility of reform. Julian wasn't asking for his trust fund back. He was offering a piece of my heart that he had helped break. "Thank you, Julian," I said. "That means a lot. We didn't talk about starting over. We didn't talk about his probation. We talked about the desk. He told me about the scratch on the leg he had polished out himself. He was finally learning the invisible signature, the one you leave on the world through effort, not just through a bank transfer. I didn't invite him for dinner, but I did tell him the address so he could have the desk delivered. It was a small bridge built with his own sweat, and for the first time, it felt like it might actually hold the weight of a real relationship. I spent New Year's Eve on the roof of my building, watching the fireworks explode over the Manhattan skyline. The mahogany desk was now sitting by my window, smelling of lemon oil and history. It was a physical reminder that while you can't buy loyalty, you can sometimes inspire it through the harsh light of truth. My foundation was thriving. We had helped over 50 seniors reclaim their independence this year. I was no longer the ice queen of the YouTube comments. I was a woman who had decided to stop being a victim of her own generosity. Julian was still in Queens, working his way up in that insurance firm. He wasn't rich, and he wasn't magnetic, but he was honest. He sent me a photo of his first modest commission check. He had framed it. It was the first signature he was truly proud of. Vanessa was a distant memory, a cautionary tale on drama channels. She was still trying to sell a lifestyle in Florida, but without a benefactor, her brand was as empty as her savings account. She had learned too late that influence without substance is just noise. I realized that the lesson of the vineyard wasn't about revenge. It was about the audit of the soul. You have to count what you give and what you receive, and if the books don't balance, you have to be brave enough to close the account. Generosity without boundaries isn't love. It's an invitation to be plundered. I picked up a pen and sat at the mahogany desk. I wasn't writing a check. I was writing my own story. The real family wasn't the people who shared my blood, but the people who respected my spirit. I looked out at the city, at the millions of lights. My phone buzzed with a "Happy New Year, Mom" from Julian. I smiled and typed back, "Happy New Year, Julian. Keep working. I'm proud of the desk." I put the phone down and watched the sky. My books were balanced. My heart was full. And for the first time in my life, the signature at the bottom of the page was entirely, completely mine.